Okay. In case you guys are wondering, I haven't put the or published publicly. It's still saved on YouTube, but I haven't published the recording from last week's session because I did say when I was recounting a story in our meeting last Wednesday about Stoic care, and I was recounting a story about a student going into the printer room. I gave his name, his real name, so I have to edit that out before publishing that recording on YouTube. So it's, I mean, even if I published it, nobody would probably say anything. It's just our channel doesn't. It's not really the purpose of our channel is not to receive 1,000 to 2 million followers, right? So it's I don't think it would really matter, but just out of a respect for privacy concerns, I really can't publish that without taking his name out. So I need to edit that out and then publish that, in case you guys were interested. And before I forget, because I'm trying to mention all the things before the end of the meeting, before I forget, after this meetup online today, the next meetup we're going to have is going to be in person. I want to start bringing back in person. I told the group that I want to start bringing that back by the end of February, beginning of March. And excuse me. Hopefully, we're going to start seeing some reductions in the corona measures in March and April, just like we saw last year in the advent of spring and then summer. So hopefully that turns out. And they haven't been getting stricter for the past, at least since early January, right? Since we had that 2G plus in Berlin rule. So it doesn't feel like things are getting worse. I don't pay attention to the numbers, but it just seems like things have calmed down. So we're going to start meeting in person starting the week, not this weekend, but the weekend afterwards. That'll be when our next meeting is. I didn't really have an idea what to do today. So what I was thinking was to follow up from last week's talk about Stoic care. And just in case, Aaron, in case you're interested, because you weren't here last week, this is what we discussed. I'll post a link in the chat here. This organization, it's really a blog, but a blog with a bunch of Stoic resources created by a PhD in, I want to say, linguistics and psychology, and the other one is a parent, and they've created this blog called Stoic Care to focus on lesser emphasized elements of Stoicism, but still come from Stoicism. Things like cosmopolitanism and justice, and how that translates into care and fairness for people when treating them with their problems. So that's where the discussion went into the direction last week. And today I wanted to kind of look at some modern day psychological research to give ourselves kind of a background in that discussion. So let me share my screen with you because I have a couple of things to share. So I was reading an article by Donald Robertson. It was a very short article on his blog, on Donald Robertson's blog. And it was just a few paragraphs long, but the whole intent of the article wasn't to write an essay. It was to actually call attention to modern developments in psychological research that connect to Stoicism. That obviously included cognitive behavioral therapy, but something like cognitive behavioral therapy is something that I wanted to discuss in a whole nother meeting. That's a big topic, and that's of course very well connected to Stoicism, including its roots, where the founders got their main principles of CBT from. So that requires an entirely separate meeting. And in fact, I'm preparing even maybe a book of the month on cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's a whole other topic. So I decided to skip that. And he called attention to a theory developed by researcher Richard Lazarus in the 1980s, a psychological researcher, called cognitive appraisal therapy. And it tries to answer the question essentially, do people respond to the same external event in the same way? And if not, how do they respond to it? And if there are varying emotional responses across cultures, across individuals, across eras, times, And so I thought this was a really good direction to go into, to kind of get a little glimpse of what cognitive appraisal therapy tries to say. And it connects, they use very similar terminology to what we have in Stoicism. So maybe we can begin by reading together the beginning here. As I mentioned, a cognitive appraisal is our interpretation of the eliciting event and of our bodily reactions to the eliciting event. Cognitive appraisal could occur unconsciously. Many appraisal dimensions exist. For instance, is the emotion caused by an internal or external event? Is the eliciting event moral or immoral? In general, cognitive appraisal theorists have noticed that people experience different emotions in response to the same eliciting event. And this led them, the founders, to think about how people interpret eliciting events differently, ultimately leading them to experience different emotions. And there's two competing views on this, two sides of the body of literature on this theory. And you kind of expect the two sides. So the first view is that cognitive appraisals cause the emotion. This view suggests that the way we interpret the eliciting event determines our emotions. Thus, different interpretations of the same eliciting event could cause people to experience different emotions. For instance, if we interpret an eliciting event as unexpected, we might experience fear. If we conclude that someone is blocking our goal, then we would experience anger. So the interpretation or the first judgment, the way we perceive a situation ultimately causes our belief or emotion about that situation. And the second view is that emotions cause appraisal, right? So that's why, I mean, you can kind of conclude what might be the two sides butting heads in this body of literature. So one body of theorists suggests that, no, it's your interpretation of the events that, cause your emotions. And the other one says, well, no, it's actually, there is some bit of emotions that cause appraisal, cause judgment of what's going on. From this view, cognitive appraisals occur after the felt emotion. For example, we might hear a gunshot and experience fear, which is then followed by appraisals of unexpectedness and ability to cope. I don't know. What do you guys think? As Stoics, or as people who study Stoicism, we're used to thinking that all emotions are ultimately caused by some judgments. But I think it depends on our definitions. For example, what do we mean by emotion? Do we mean just a physical neurochemical response? So a brute or raw feeling? In that case, then we need to distinguish between feelings and emotions. And then the other side of the coin, what do we mean by judgments? Do we mean or cognitive appraisals? And this is where I haven't been able to catch that in this body of literature. I haven't been able to actually determine what they mean by appraisal, because do they mean something consciously or rationally, a judgment that you rationally come to, or kind of an instinct, an instinctual judgment? That's usually what the Stoics mean when they mean first judgments, right? Your first impressions of something, or something instinctual. But regardless, I think it depends on your definition. But I was interested to ask, well, what do you guys think in terms of these two views? Is there more merit to one than the other? And even though Stoics would, we would obviously group Stoicism here, is there some merit here based upon how you define some of these terms in maybe this certain situation you're in? And I think there's just three of us here. So you guys, I forgot my camera's still being shared. You guys can talk, yeah? We don't have to raise hand. You guys can just come in.
I heard an interesting question being asked, and it sort of reminds me of this. Is surprise an emotion? And this kind of, I know that it's somewhat related in some ways to try and, if you're looking for, does an emotion cause a response or response cause an emotion? I guess the first thing we can look at, does surprise itself constitute an emotion? Because in some ways inside of that is an answer in its own right, that do we feel something as a result of stimuli, or does stimuli cause us to feel something in some ways, right? I mean, shock is an emotion, granted, but is it really under our own control, and how we respond to that? I mean, shock can elicit fear. It can elicit. I'm not sure if we have good shock, but maybe we do, right? I think the interpretation of something that surprises us that's good is something that happens many seconds afterwards while we've processed it. So, as I say, I mean, I don't have a particular answer, but I guess I have been thinking about in the past couple of days is surprise and emotion, and this feels to me somewhat related. I could be wrong, of course, but my guess is that in the end, that emotions are actually all part of the entire package. You know, from the stimuli to the entire thing. That it's not one thing causes another, but it is in fact part of the same entirety of the human experience in understanding what that event means to me as an individual, or as a mind, as a consciousness. So yeah, I mean, I think I've asked more questions than answered anything, in fairness.
But you pick up a good question that it's interesting that you read that into what I had asked, because I didn't notice it. But I guess that does follow from what I was asking, is how do we define what an emotion is? Because you were saying that the feeling of shock or surprise can lead to either joy, or if you want to, just make it binary for the time being, just for argument's sake, joy or fear, right? It kind of depends on the context of what you're surprised or shocked about. And that kind of maybe puts shock and surprise. I don't know. For me, that would put shock and surprise as kind of what comes before emotion. Because for me, the fact that you feel joy, or so for example, you first feel shock about something, it's an immediate physical neurochemical response to an external event. And then you start forming opinions or judgments about it, depending on if you're thinking through this rationally or irrationally. And then only afterwards, I mean, this happens all in split seconds. It's not like this is a, step-by-step, minute-by-minute approach, but this is, your body does this and your mind does this in a matter of less than a second. And then you interpret your situation as joyful or shockingly fearful, maybe. So that's a good point. I mean, for me, I wouldn't even group shock or surprise as an emotion. It would be more of in the line of maybe just a gut feeling, and then only afterwards do you feel something like joy or fear based upon the interpretation that you're taking about it, or the appraisal, I guess, to use their technical jargon about what's going on.
Am I right in thinking that, I cannot remember where I read it about the Stoics as well, but there is a concept of proto-emotions. I can't remember which Stoic writes about it, but they discuss a man on a Stoic on a ship with someone, and it's a big stormy sea, and they comment about how the Stoic shows fear and it shows shock, and worry about things that are going. And I can't remember which Stoic it is, but they are discussing about how there is the nature of proto-emotions. You are allowed to bring yourself back in, which sort of indicates that in some ways we have emotions come and we interpret them. If that notion is correct, and I guess there is a proto-emotion. I mean, otherwise, I guess nano expressions wouldn't be a thing either.
What do you mean by nano expressions?
So this whole, I mean, Lie to Me is the TV program that made that famous, right? But the microfacial expressions that people have to certain stimuli, if you slow them down, you will.
Okay.
Disgust in people's faces. You do see the turning up of lips, the sly smile, so on and so forth. This is all happening at a super, not subconscious, but an unconscious level, I guess. And as I say, there is a science to that as well, right? I mean, it is documented. But that would certainly make me think that maybe the emotion comes first and our interpretation of what we're feeling comes second. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I never heard of nano expressions before, but then that obviously begs the question, which one causes which. I think most Stoics would definitely fall in the camp that you have some proto emotions, but you can always change your interpretation of what's going on to cause your own emotion, to cause your own, emotional response or non-emotional response to what's going on, to formulate a rational belief instead of letting your emotion come automatically and follow automatically from a proto emotion. Yeah, I just want to comment. I think the ship analogy I read the only ship analogy I've read is because I haven't finished reading all of Epictetus's discourses. I've only read like the first one or two, like books, and but in one of Piliucci's books, in one of Massimo Piliucci's Introduction to Stoicism books, he does recount a metaphor of a ship, and not in the same way you're describing it. He describes a metaphor of the ship where you have the captain, you have the deckhand swabbing the deck, you have the guy at the rudder serving as the guy to direct the flag, not the flag, the the flag, the sail, and then the guy heading the wheel, directing the boat, and the roles that you play on that boat reflect kind of the roles in society. So that's the context in which I've heard a boat metaphor. But that was, and I'm guessing that's from Epictetus, because Massimo Piliucci bases his book in that book on his stories and the view of Stoicism based upon his reading of Epictetus. So maybe that's an Epictetus thing.
I'm pretty sure, but I could be wrong. That it resonated, and my memory wants to tell me that it is How to Think Like a Roman Emperor from Donald Robinson. I'm pretty sure, and it is a story rather than a metaphor. It is a story about how a Stoic is shocked by the big waves, and the boat is being thrown all over the place. Okay. And the man and his son make comment about why this Stoic is. I thought you had control over your emotions.
Oh man, okay. Now I have to go. Now I have to go look this up after this meetup.
I'll see if I can come across it again, and I'll certainly forward it to you. But it reminds me, because in the end, as they say, you're allowed to feel whatever you want to feel. It's how you deal with it from there on inwards is basically the message that comes back from this, right? You can't control certain things, but those events, right? But you can control how you respond to it afterwards. And it's where I'd first heard the term proto-emotion. So I can't imagine it would have been really anybody else really talking about it in that context than what I was reading at the time, which would have been Donald Robinson and the How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. It's not something that I can't think of anywhere else where I would have come across it. But I will double check, see if I can come back with it. But it definitely one of them, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And sorry, I didn't know. Sorry, I didn't know if you wanted to comment. I didn't want to skip you.
Actually, I was going to say something. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I've got really bad connection, so I don't know.
Oh, okay. You're clear.
I wanted to say something about like the second view. Like, to me, the first view appeals more logical, but I read about an experiment that can make sense of the second view, that emotion can cause appraisal. Like, for example, there was an experiment that they did where they had people walking over a swinging bridge, and they would have people of the opposite sex coming towards you on that bridge. And what they did is they checked how attractive the person rated the other person coming towards them. And what they could see is that when the bridge was like swinging, people would grade the other person on attractivity level higher than when the bridge wasn't swinging. And how they try to explain this is that like a swinging bridge causes arousal, causes like anxiety, a little bit of anxiousness, and and when you see the other person, because you're feeling arousal, you're trying to make sense of this, and you're saying, okay,
Oh, did we just lose Sarah?
I think so.
Okay. I was hoping she'd make it. Yeah, Sarah, I think we lost you. The audio, yeah. Oh man, I feel like she was almost done. And but that's an interesting study. Oh, hi, Sarah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know how much you could hear from what I was
But
saying.
we heard everything up until you basically went. I mean,
Oh.
it was a little staticky, but we heard everything.
Perfect.
But that's a really interesting study. Yeah, that it, because you want to believe this theory, and I do. I think we can all agree that this is they make a very strong point that there's often enough a case where pausing after your first proto emotion, we can call it, I guess, to appraise the situation, that will cause you to perhaps differ in your interpretation of the event based upon how you're thinking about it. Right. So you can kind of cause your emotion. You can cause what you're feeling or what you're thinking and believing afterwards. And I think for the most part, but this is true. But I think this struck a tone with me. This gunshot example, and in your example, Sarah, that it's really interesting that the external environment can unconsciously tend us towards certain emotions about something we didn't think of before. I feel like there's something about shock value for certain emotions. Like the gunshot happens so loudly and almost instantaneously, that it's just it immediately sends a signal to your brain that there's no other way to interpret it than the way in which you probably are interpreting it. And I feel like it's the same way as maybe attractiveness. Like you said, as people walk across the bridge. I mean, I know you said it's based upon the external setting and the bridge, and how the bridge itself is maybe causing the way in which it's moving is causing people to have to explain what they're feeling to somebody else being attractive or unattractive versus somebody else, which is quite extraordinary. Yeah, I feel like if there's a feedback loop. I feel like this second view is almost like sometimes the problem, where we have we don't pay attention enough to some of the external stimuli that's causing us to appraise the situation or interpret the situation in an unhealthy way. And this view is almost like a solution. Is almost like, okay, well, if your emotions are causing you to appraise the situation in a certain way, then maybe we need to do a better job of paying attention to external stimuli, like the people walking across the bridge. If only they paid attention to the external stimuli, maybe making them feel the way they're feeling, then they could rationally assess and appraise the situation. I don't know. So it sounds like we could kind of, and they don't state it in this way. We can go on to the next page to see kind of what some of the results are, because they are quite interesting. But that's what it sounds like to me is what we're approaching, is that if it is based on some external stimuli, then maybe the more aware we are of external stimuli when we're feeling something will help us do this, the first one, instead of the second one. And then, yeah, I'm just quickly waiting to hear a response, but then, oh, you can't hear me. Aaron, can you hear me? Oh, okay. Aaron can hear me. Sarah, I don't know. Maybe I put my microphone up. Maybe now is this working? Okay. Oh, wait. Hold on. Wait, Aaron, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Sarah, can you hear me okay? I guess no.
Okay. So, Sarah, we believe maybe the problem is on your side because Aaron and I can hear each other. Yeah.
Now the question is, can we hear Sarah? Unmute her microphone. This is the, shall we turn it on and off again?
Maybe the third time's a charm. Sarah, can you hear us? Or maybe, Sarah, if you can hear us, can you unmute yourself? Maybe say something so we can test out if we can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Perfect. Okay. Third time's a charm. Let's do this. Okay, let me switch to the other screen. Yeah, so actually, the body of literature shows some. We're not going to go through this in depth because I could only find there's an abstract for a research article which is quite interesting. But first of all, this free text on Penn State's website has some interesting research. So if we take a look at the next page, it gives us a little bit of depth as to who is right in that body of literature. And it's quite interesting what they say. It turns out both theorists are somewhat right. The current thought is that cognitive appraisals which developed earlier in our ancestral past may be universal. These cognitive appraisals are the less complex appraisals, such as pleasantness and novelty. So actually, maybe Aaron, hi, Sarah. Oh, I didn't see you go off. Sorry, I was on this page. I actually thought of your statement, Aaron, about shock and about surprise, and I'm wondering if that may be considered a less complex appraisal. That maybe shock and surprise, the reason why we all feel those things during very similar events is because shock and surprise are kind of these proto-emotions, things that have been built into humanity for ages. And only recently have we been, as this says, developing more complex emotions that we can maybe actually control. So theorists believe that cognitive appraisals that developed more recently, such as immorality and responsibility, or those that show cultural differences. I think it does go on to say there is, I forget where in this literature, it does mention that some theorists also report that there is some individual differences within a cultural community, but by and large, they start to solidify in terms of when you get down to a community scale or some sort of community with shared cultural values and customs. But nonetheless, there are differences once you start getting to more complex emotions like complex appraisals, like immorality and responsibility, right? When we feel like we're responsible or it's our duty to act on something, we're going to respond to a certain event in more variable ways than if we found something pleasant or novel, because those are more basic old human instincts, which I thought was quite interesting. So yeah, I just wanted to bring your attention to this. So this is kind of what their body of research shows up till now. Oh, I can't see. Yeah, Sarah.
The funny thing is that when I read this article, actually the line beneath the one that you marked, where it was saying that it found cultural differences. I find this interesting because I wonder, I mean, the study is from 1997, so pretty old. He was saying that African residents reported more immorality. And Latins, for example, less.
I know where you're going with this.
A difficult study because I'm wondering, I mean, our understanding of what is immoral is very culturally created as well, you know? So I wonder if maybe you would come to those results because the study is made by someone who has a certain definition of what is moral and immoral, and then have results like this. I mean, this is not concerning the general question of if there are cultural differences between appraisals, but I was just wondering if this specific study, it would be worth looking into this more.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, because I want to ask, because I think it depends on the question. Like if the researchers went in there and they defined what is immoral or moral, like in terms of a response to a situation, then if all the people who were surveyed in the African community and the Latin American community, if all the people surveyed gave the responses in terms of this is what I did, but they didn't report on how they felt, if it was moral or immoral, then I would agree with you. Then I think there's a serious concern that the researchers' definitions of how they categorize actions as immoral or moral are definitely playing a role. But then maybe they didn't. Again, we have to look at this research article, but maybe the researchers just asked the African residents, did you perceive this action or this event to be something moral happening, or did you perceive something that you have to do to act on this event or to respond to this event to be moral or immoral? Then maybe it's a little bit, that would be, I'm sure there are still problems, but I think that's maybe a better way for researchers to do this kind of study. And you're right, 1997 is old. Even I went to college and had took a sociology course out of interest back in 2011, 2012, and that was already, 14, 15 years past the date of this publication. So it looks like he publishes more. But continuing on this roadmap, thinking that there's a difference between the early prototypical emotions and interpretations of events that we developed early on in our evolution, and versus those that we have more control of now, the more complex ones. Which, if there's evidence to that, I can get on board with that. That makes sense. I think that's maybe in line with what the Stoics mean in terms of there's always going to be these kind of prototypical feelings and instincts that we get, but the more complex ones like fear and anger we can control. I mean, anybody who has ever heard of, been a participant in, or knows somebody who participated in anger, what do they call it? Anger therapy or anger management therapy, knows that there's a way to manage that emotion. So, but what they don't do is manage something like shock, right? They know they're going to be shocked and surprised sometimes, but what they do is they try and manage the anger they get from that. So this kind of makes sense. But yeah.
There is a quote from Seneca that kind of makes me think as well. On the flip side, you say that from shock, but is it not Seneca's quote about if you want a man not to flinch, you should train him. You should train him before the crisis. I know I'm paraphrasing it right there, but there is. What do we call it? We call it aversion therapy, don't we? Where if somebody has a fear of something, that we give them stimuli to that fear on a regular occurrence to bring down almost the volume of the emotion experienced. Here you go. If you would not have a man flinch when the crisis comes, train him before it comes. But this is, we can make people less fearful to things, by
and less perturbed to shock is what you're saying. Like we can even still train ourselves to respond differently to things even as basic as shock.
But I guess that's one big hack in the end. If you keep on targeting it and making it more experience, I guess you're allowing the mind to develop pre-established synapses that it can grab onto. Oh, this is nothing to worry about. I don't need to trigger flight or fly or any of these type of things. We've experienced this before. This is not unknown. Maybe.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there'll always be a limit to the, I guess, what's the word? In the many levels of, I forget the word I'm trying to use, the many levels of emotions. And the deeper we go, we can definitely at some point train ourselves to respond to things differently. I think my shock value, for example, of what students stay in the classroom has been dwindled because I teach and full time, and after the first time you teach, it's chaotic when you enter the classroom. But then after a while, you just get less surprised and shocked by the student who calls out, or the student who comes up and asks you follow-up questions afterwards, and you're like, I gotta go to my next class, but the student wants to hear more. So I think over time there's experience and training that you can undergo to definitely prepare better and respond differently to certain things. I don't know. What do you guys feel like there's certain cases? Sorry, I didn't. I have a question now, but if I thought I heard somebody's mic turn on, but you can ask your question. But let me get this out actually. So my question would have been: are there situations or contexts either in the past that you've experienced, or you could think of somebody else has experienced that you know, when they would prefer not to be trained to prepare?
Okay, I know what I'm doing, or I know how to deal with situations that I wasn't expecting, for example.
Sorry, Sarah? We only heard the tail end of what you were saying. Sarah? Sarah.
Sarah,
I didn't realize she was talking the whole time. Sarah, I didn't realize you were talking the whole time. We couldn't hear you. I think she's a bit frozen. But yeah, so I don't want to. I don't want to pause, so maybe we just let Sarah restart again. But yeah, my follow-up question would be if there's any context you think that in which you wouldn't want to prepare for a situation in the future. There's something in which you need to be surprised about, or you think it's best that you have less knowledge of beforehand. And most of the time we would like more knowledge of future events and more knowledge to prepare ourselves for what might come, for the emotions we feel. But are there examples where you could pick out, there's just, like, I'll pick a very mundane one. I'll pick a very mundane example. Birthday party. Or when you know holidays are coming around the corner, you ask less questions to other people. You're going to let them plan the surprise birthday party. You're gonna plan maybe an anniversary dinner for your parents, or for blah blah blah. So there are certain maybe mundane cases where you wouldn't want the knowledge and prepare for something. You're gonna fall into that shock or surprise. But I don't know if you guys know of any more complex situations.
What I would ask about that is, I don't actually have an answer. I have a question back.
Okay.
You're not looking for joy in the surprise. You're not trying to elicit another emotion with another emotion at this point. So you're saying, I don't want to ask too many questions around Christmas, or so on and so forth. Are you not replacing one emotion with another emotion? The enjoyment of being surprised, the pleasantry of a shock. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of it like that. Yeah, so you might be. Yeah, it's a good point.
Excitement, right, is an emotion to be aroused, I guess, right? In a fun way, of course, right? Do you know what I mean? But you're not saying, I want to trade shock for surprise, or so on and so forth, right? I just wonder, if really it's a trading of different emotions.
No, because I think there's a difference between preparing for the feeling of joy when you know something surprising is coming to you, versus a lack of interest in thinking about how you would feel or respond. Yeah, for me, there's a big difference, or not a big difference. There's just some sort of substantive difference between them, because I'm not, I'm not preparing for anything. I'm kind of assuming that I'm going to be surprised in a good, joyful way of what comes. For event X, let's say there's a surprise party, so I'm assuming that I'm going to feel joy. I think there's actually an expectation there that you feel comfortable knowing that in these situations you're going to feel joy when you feel shock. So I think it's more of and I haven't studied psychology in detail, only certain components that may have something to do with Stoicism. So maybe but you know the field better than I do. But I feel like this is more of a negative, where there's a lack of preparation for something that you're assuming is going to happen, which sounds very unstoic. But again, I think the whole point of Stoicism is being comfortable with the knowledge and the expectations you have with things already, versus if you want to change them at all because you need to prepare for X or Y. Because in my opinion, I wouldn't prepare for those events, because even if I felt, let's say, utter mortification at what happens, maybe I have a couple of friends who get into a big fight at a celebration, or at a social gathering, and that kind of ruins, I would say, a quote, ruins at first glance the atmosphere, the mood of the party. I still, no matter what goes my way, wouldn't necessarily feel like I need to prepare in the sense that, I mean, of course, I prepare in the sense that I shouldn't feel dismay afterwards. Just continue my evening, or continue my life as normal. I'll keep my friend company, et cetera, et cetera. But even if there is some negative shock value I was prepared to have, versus joyful shock value, maybe there are certain cases where you want to feel something in a short term, because it's something that maybe you can't prepare for, or these things happen and you need to get used to these things happening. Therefore, you need to train yourself to feel this on a moment's notice, to feel things spontaneously. I don't know if I'm confusing the words that I want to say, if I'm confusing the ideas, or I'm making myself clear, but that's, yeah.
I believe that's the life of a Stoic right there. Confusing them or making them clear.
Yeah.
It's a little from both, I guess, right? I guess where probably this analogy I do struggle to follow, but I guess in a sports context, you probably want to rely on instincts in certain sports and so on and so forth. Do you want to train away instinct and surprise and understanding, and maybe in contact sports and so on and so forth? Do you want to practice away your aggression in a contact sport? I guess probably not. There's probably a degree of allowing your emotions and some of the more proto emotions to hold key. When you talk about this, I mean, you looked at the positive surprise, and I guess I still resonate with the idea of, can anger be a good thing? Can aggression be a good thing? This is the maybe a little bit of Rage Against the Machine there with, anger as a gift. But do you know what I mean? I wonder if there are situations where aggression and anger are warranted, are real, are a needed emotion. I'm not too sure. I mean, as I say, I imagine the situations, but I can't think of any. Maybe sport is the closest I can think of.
That's true. Yeah, maybe things that you need to run on instinct with. Maybe something like a sport, which have real life examples. If we're on the subject of raging against the machine and revolution, we could think of places like conflict zones around the world, where there's not really a chance for you to, if you're in the midst of things, even if you're a civilian, there's oftentimes not a chance for you to prepare for what comes next. And oftentimes it's probably best you act on instinct, because if you didn't, you could die, right? So I think, and that's an extreme example, but I think that helps me understand what you're saying. In a sports setting, there's not really time for you to make an appraisal, at least consciously. You need to let things happen instinctually. Otherwise, the other team is going to win. The other team is just going to kick the ball down the field, and well, there you go. Like the game's over. Yeah, I guess that's a good point. There's maybe a good example of when you really can't prepare for something. Maybe because you don't, not that you don't want to, but because you can't. It's not beneficial for the whole point of the game. Let me just switch back. Sarah, how are you doing? Can you hear us?
Hi.
Oh,
I'm going to try again and see if I can stay online long enough.
can you repeat what you were saying before? We missed it. You were saying something and you trailed off. We only heard maybe the last few words.
I don't know if I can connect back to that.
That's okay. No, I didn't want to put you in the spotlight. Just wondering if you still wanted to.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep both thoughts in mind.
Okay.
So the one thing, I'm going to start with the second thought that I'm having right now, okay? Because I might forget about it. When we were talking about like emotion and if it is desired or not, or if it is important, and you were talking about sports, for example, I don't know how Stoics think about emotion in that way, but I think emotion are something that are very important to actually make sense of a situation, because emotion in a lot of cases is simply information. Like if I see something and I react afraid, it's it's an information that this might be dangerous to me, you know. So I don't know if I understand this right, but I would assume the goal of Stoicism wouldn't be not to have emotion, but it would probably be how to react towards an emotion and maybe influence an emotion or change it. Because like if we didn't have emotions, we'd be lacking an awful lot of information, you know, especially in cases where we need to react very fast, where we don't have the time to appraise the situation first. We would need the immediate emotional response to know what we're supposed to be doing, like aggression, for example. If someone, I don't know, hits you, for example, you need to be able to react fast and defend yourself and either fight back or something like this. And it makes sense to then like reappraise the situation. But I think the emotion in the first instance like is very important to react with that. I don't know if this makes sense how I'm bringing it across.
Yeah. It makes me, what you're saying makes me think of the book. It's a very popular book by now. I've heard a lot of people read it. Thinking Fast and Slow, by the famous psychologist. Well, actually, now I forget if he's a psychologist or a statistician, but I think it's a moot point. It's a great book by Daniel Kahneman. And I'm thinking now of doing a book of the month with that one. Maybe going through a few months of delving into psychology and behavior with Berlin Stoics, because that book. The reason why I bring that book up is because you're making me think of heuristics, right? You're making me think of the ways in which actually sometimes doing things instinctually and unconsciously help us out on a daily basis. Like you said, like there are some things you shouldn't have to think about, otherwise that'll slow you down. I just realized I have a piece of paper and a pen in my hand because I want to write something down. But really, when I pulled the piece of paper and the pen out of my bag, it was kind of an unconscious thing that I was doing. So it's just, there are some things that you don't want your brain to have to think about, and process, because you're right, Sarah, it's just too much for your brain to handle. You need to focus on the bigger decisions in your life and the bigger external events that will affect your life. And those are kind of priorities. Maybe that's the Stoic problem. Maybe the Stoic problem is, because I feel like we already have the strategies to cope with how do we deal with first judgments or unconscious biases, right? That's kind of a secondary problem. The first problem is how do we even distinguish when an external event is a priority enough for us to have to use Stoic strategy to deal with it, to determine if it's, of course, once we affirm if it's an internal event, something we can control or influence, still there's the question of, do we need to? Does this require our time and investment? Because not everything does. That's a good point. Maybe a future topic I'm just writing down, or maybe we can do a discussion or meetup where we talk about how we discuss priorities when we know there's multiple external events that we can respond to and control, or at least somehow influence in one day. How do we sort those priorities out? What would a Stoic do is a good question. Thinking fast and slow. Okay.
Another thing I was thinking right now is not just when it's talking about fast or slow, where I don't know how much you know about this. There's even different neurological paths in the brain for fast track reactions and slow track reactions.
Yeah.
And I think that book might refer to it. So I think one question is, how do I react? How important are emotions if I have to react fast? Plus, looking at human development over the lifespan, for example, like when your father developed, the older you get, I think you can change emotions by changing your cognitive appraisal, for example, which would be a very Stoic thing to do, to say, okay, I have an experience something that causes an emotion. But I want to influence this. Whereas, for example, if you're a little child, it is intensely important, for example, to feel that something is disgusting, then I won't eat it, for example. Whereas when I'm growing up, there are some things like medicine, for example, that are disgusting, but I can reappraise it by saying, okay, this is healthy for me, so I'm going to swallow it, and then I will feel less disgust,
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, there is an extent of psychology and neuroscience that we study as teachers, just because we need to. And I do know what you mean. I'm trying to find an appropriate diagram with enough depth, because there is a part of the brain that, so I mean, first you have your cortex, and I'm talking about the frontal cortex, which is basically your executive system. That's where you're generally going to make the bigger decisions. But then there's that part of the brain. I think it's if I remember correctly, it's the thalamus. I want to say it's the thalamus that stores. Maybe it's the hypothalamus. One of those responds to emotions, and one of them, I think it's somewhere in the thalamus, that stores heuristics, that stores the things you don't need to think about, because those are the things that you can kind of fast track. Sorry? You broke up there, Sarah. What was that? Oh no, we lost her again. We can't hear you. Oh wait, say something again.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back. What did you say?
The fast track, if I remember it right, is everything connected to the limbic system. So I think that would be
That's
amygdala.
it.
I'm not quite
Okay.
sure. The thalamus maybe as well, but I'm not too sure.
That's in the same area, though. That's in the same area, so that makes sense. Yeah, because the amygdala, I know, is where you get those intense emotions. But I'm pretty sure it's the thalamus area is where you start storing heuristics, or where you start storing. But yeah, I don't know where it goes after the amygdala. But yeah, you make a good point that there's even a structure of the brain that is really it exists for the whole purpose of storing heuristics and helping you fast track certain things. And then there's a whole other part of the brain there for bigger decision making. So yeah, you're right. I think that's also good. Like it's good to know about these things, because it helps you understand that it's literally built into your brain, the capacity to focus on those priorities and think through bigger decision making events, and storing those things that you can fast track in the future. I think it helps you when knowing the structure of your own brain can do that, knowing that you have control over things and some things you can't have control over. It's a nice, nice knowing that. There is another piece of, oh, sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but if I remember in the Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow book, they describe as a type 1 and type 2 thinking. I guess it's really a complex way of talking about the subconscious and the conscious mind. A lot of what we talk about is instinctual, the instinct of fight and flight and so on and so forth. This is almost automated, but isn't emotions more of a conscious level in the front of our mind, understanding of what's going on? Emotions, not type 1 type of thinking, and fear really are built into the more subconscious automated process. I mean, because fear and fight and flight and so on and so forth are an evolutionary trait, for sure. I mean, this is where we've had them from. To feel fear to certain stimuli, to run fast, and yet society, I guess, being a social creature, is a hack of the brain in a lot of ways, to be able to understand emotions, to use decentering, to be able to imagine another person's thoughts. These are high level functions, a high level brain power being involved. I mean, a level of intellect in some ways. And I wonder if no matter how many times I tell myself it's not things that upset me, but my feelings about things that upset me, I still find myself having to tell myself that so regularly without, like, for 2.5, 3 years, I have told myself this every single day, at least once, twice, right? It doesn't get any easier. I mean, it gets easier to come back from those things, but I still find myself forgetting what is a core principle that I want to live by and have trained myself constantly to try and live by. And that makes me feel that bit that does make me angry is still waiting for me to say, now, come on. You're making yourself do
act on me. Yeah. It's still asking you to do that. I think there's so I think there's good news and bad news, because you're right. It's we always have to constantly remind ourselves of this. But for one thing, I think the fact that we have to remind ourselves is just a product of the fact that we're always going to be storing things and doing things unconsciously at a fast rate, because that's our brain wants to do that. It wants to fast track things so it can limit how much brain power we use. I'm no technical jargon here. I don't know what I mean by brain power. As a scientist, you need to have some sort of technical measure of what that means. But regardless of what that is, your brain wants to fast track things. I think what Thinking Fast and Slow, the research showed, and the research even up to today shows, so far as the I've read on blogs, is that most of the neuroscientific research shows that pretty much most of what goes on in our brain is automatic. There's actually very little of our brain that's conscious. Most of our brain is trying to do things unconsciously, because exactly what they're talking about. Your brain wants to fast track things. That being said, I think part of that has a light at the end of the tunnel, because the fact that you're able to remind yourself, this is just my interpretation, maybe the optimist in me, but the fact that you're able to remind yourself so often is unconscious. Like, you don't consciously say, I should remind myself of this. You just, you're wandering in your thoughts, you're feeling this emotion, all of a sudden you say to yourself, I have to keep focused and make sure that I know I can control the emotion. But sometimes, sometimes I do that consciously. It's like, sometimes I think to myself, okay, I'm a Stoic, I need to think this through. But sometimes I don't. Sometimes my mind just automatically goes to, this is just an emotion. This is something I can control, because maybe over time I've built that in as a heuristic. Maybe just over the past 10 years, I've just, again, went to this kind of meeting once every week for 2 years. And almost every meeting, somebody says, focus on what those things you can control and not on those things you can't control. And maybe that's just a built-in heuristic for me now. Maybe it's a learned behavior. It's something trained in me. So maybe actually heuristics can help us if we can't get rid of heuristics, and maybe we shouldn't, because I don't want to have to think every time I open a door or put on my shoes. But maybe we can use that to our advantage. Maybe we can build more complex learned behaviors, like Stoicism as a heuristic. So I don't know. Maybe there is an advantage to this.
The other one that I find interesting is this from Aurelius with you can choose not to have an opinion. It sort of infers that the opinion is a choice. But I struggle not to have an opinion. I have to remind myself I can choose not to have an opinion on this. But that means I've had the opinion to start off with to say, hang on a second. Now, it may not have fully formed. It may not have got its arms and legs and grown and so on and so forth. It may be in its first point. But instinctively, there's something in me that's going, well, I don't like, or I really like, or whatever. But I struggle to have something that happens and be, what is it, the term, be indifferent to things that make no difference. There's sort of, do you know what I mean? I mean, how often do we instinctively not have an opinion? That feels to me that is a process that we have to go through to say, I'm not going to have an opinion, rather than saying, okay, now I have to have an opinion on this and this and this and this and this. As I say, it's something recently from Aurelius that I'd read, so that this is why that was on my track, because as I say, I do like to be opinionated. And I would like to try and maybe be a bit less opinionated.
There was a oh, sorry, maybe I should pause every so often because I know Aaron and I are batting back and forth. But Sarah, do you have a comment on that? Do you have a comment on this? No, not right now. There's a story, a very short story. So a few months ago, one of the other, the philosophy teacher. It's I call it a philosophy course, but it's called a theory of knowledge course in the this international diploma program that we offer as an alternative to the Abitur here at the school where I work. And one of the courses is this half-credit philosophy course. And so what he does is he asks his students to split up into two groups. And he invited myself and the chemistry teacher in our school, the physics teacher, the chemistry teacher, to go into separate rooms, and the students surveyed us. And the students surveyed us on the ethics of using science, whether that be the ethics of reporting on science. So those who are publishing and the academics who, as we've learned more and more recently, may fudge the details on a psychological report in order for that the data can confirm their or be in correspondence with their hypothesis. So whose responsibility is it at the end of the day? What happens in a lab? All the way to the atom bomb, right? So they're asking questions about ethics. And so we do the whole survey. I don't hear what the chemistry teacher is saying because she's in the other room. And I have a discussion with the philosophy teacher afterwards, maybe hours afterwards, the day afterwards. And he was saying, actually, it was pretty interesting because the students got entirely different answers from both of you. I said, really? I mean, I thought the ethical position is clear. He said, well, actually, it's not the fact that the ethical position was different. It's the fact that you were very opinionated and Miss blah, blah, blah was not. That she took a very neutral stance on some of these issues. And the way in which it sounded like what he was saying was the way in which she framed her answers were that where there's two sides of the issues. And then she kind of juxtaposed the two sides of the issues or multiple perspectives of each ethical issue in science, but then stopped there. She didn't give an opinion. Whereas I was much more forceful. I was like, oh, no, for example, the fact that we needed to throw the atom bomb on Japan to win is complete hodgepodge, right? We all know that the military advisors to the American government at the time were saying we could, but we don't need to. Japan's ready, and they've admitted secretly to be ready to surrender in months. There's no need to throw the atom bomb. We're close to finishing this war. And I was very clear on the ethical responsibility or irresponsibility of the American government to act the way they did. I don't know if they asked the same questions to the chemistry teacher because each student could pose their own question. So I don't know if she responded to the same question, but I kind of agree with you to a certain extent. When my brain hears of a situation, an external event about something that has moral, ethical implications, I'm like, oh, I have to have an opinion on this. Even if I'm not a professional in the field, I start reading up on it and I'm like, I have to have a position on this. It's too important not to. But you're right. I don't know, just like heuristics, I'm not sure if there are some cases where you shouldn't need to. I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are in my life sometimes where I've said, I just don't need to have an opinion on that. It's just not, maybe there are some ethical concerns related to it, but maybe it's just not, it doesn't concern me enough. But yeah, I guess so. There are those things. There are those things that maybe don't have ethical implications, like the indifference you're talking about, whether or not to what's a good example of a neutral indifferent, something that's neither preferred nor dispreferred, or even dispreferred, maybe disease or natural disasters are really good examples of dispreferred indifference. And I think war is one thing. You can definitely have an opinion about war because it's man-made, but something like natural disaster and disease, how can you really have an opinion on that? I think diseases should be banned. Well, sorry, but your opinion doesn't really matter because diseases do what they want. So I feel like for me in that case, I wouldn't have an opinion on disease, or maybe how we respond to curing a disease, but certainly not the indifferent itself, not the external. So there are some things where I wouldn't have an opinion on it, but only because I feel like there's no ethical consequence for me not having an opinion on the fact that natural disasters happen, right? It's just a natural disaster. It's something that happens generally. And of course, something like curing diseases, okay, we can help reduce the impact on climate change, but even without climate change, there's still natural disasters. So as long as there are no ethical implications, I generally don't have an opinion on it most of the time. Sarah.
I was thinking when you were saying this about like not having an opinion, and maybe this being like a good thing, not having an opinion, I was thinking of like, for example, anthropology. If you do anthropological research, I would assume that it is of great value not to have an opinion on things. Or if you're doing like cultural studies, for example, because like, if you have an opinion on certain things, then probably you won't perceive a lot of information because you already orient yourself in based on that opinion. So I would assume those are, for example, areas that where it makes a lot of sense not trying not to have an opinion as good as possible.
I think in meditation, so we see what Marcus Aurelius saying, you can choose not to have an opinion about this. It sort of infers in his everyday life. I mean, he's not doing anthropological work here or so on and so forth. I get your point, though. That's, and I guess in certain ways in sociology and so on and so forth, that's a methodology not to have an opinion in some ways. But I wonder in more life, when we see something that happens, we jump to have an opinion. But as I say, maybe we don't need to have an opinion. And it is in meditations, it is there that you can choose not to have an opinion. And he is talking about the things that upset him. I mean, I wonder if you see your parents argue with somebody in the shop, you can choose not to have an opinion. You can choose if somebody has been rude to somebody and you might dislike it or so on and so forth. You can choose. I guess it's indifference, but I'm interested because I guess the opinion is what upsets us in a lot of cases or makes us happy, either way. But I guess once you have an opinion, you have a value judgment. And if you have a value judgment, well, that's the thing that has the potential to injure us, right? When it boils down to it. So I just wonder, I mean, I like somebody being rude to somebody at work. You can choose to not have an opinion. But I wonder if that really happens. Do you know what I mean? Like I say, I mean, I understand the professional context, like not
like on an unconscious level. Like they say, I don't have an opinion, but it's, it's there, it's spoiling up in there. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I use that trick myself more now in the past couple of weeks to say, listen, I can choose not to have an opinion, you know, not be upset, not be angry, just to be different and choose not to have an opinion. That's a real conscious effort. Do you know what I mean? It's a preferred status to have, right? I choose not to do this. But of course, it then makes me think as well that I didn't choose to have the opinion to start off with, but I must be comfortable enough with it to get it.
Yeah, I feel like actually, I feel like there's some compatibility between what you guys are saying. I mean, for one thing, I think it definitely, you would definitely see some sort of difference across cultures or communities, where there are some communities which don't have an opinion on something. I mean, I could even guess that maybe, for example, in the United States, because I just know the community better there. That's where I grew up. That if you take it to the political stage, so especially because it's so divided today politically in terms of their in terms of how extremely they defend their views. Let's take a typical Republican voter in the United States. So on the right wing side of the political spectrum, it is probably the case that they don't have an opinion, or too much of an opinion, on trying to think of an issue where the Democrats are stand strongly on it, but the Republicans kind of just shrug their shoulders. Like, I would say actually privacy is a good one. Privacy is an issue where I always felt like Republicans, at least on the corporate level, if you're talking about online, I'm talking about online privacy. In-person privacy is a whole another deal with in the United States. But online privacy, I can definitely understand if Republicans don't have an opinion on that issue, because they defend it if the issue was brought up, because I think that, their base of supporters would definitely agree to have more privacy security online, especially because Americans, they idolize the notion of privacy and individualism, whereas the Democrats have more of a proactive opinion on it. They're like, no, we need to talk, we need to encounter and challenge these corporate entities like Facebook and Instagram and Amazon, and establish privacy regulations online. Whereas the Republicans might go along with it. And I've seen this issue I've tracked this issue where this is one of those few issues in the United States that do get some bipartisan support, because they both don't think that these social media companies should be having this much influence in society. But it's interesting that the Republicans don't usually mention it on their platform. It's not part of their opinion, but the Democrats do. So I feel like there's some sociological input. And then I definitely agree that you made me think, Aaron, there are some times where you just you don't want an opinion. And sometimes I feel like the reason why you're pressured to have the opinion, sometimes why it's easier maybe to change an opinion rather than to have a lack of opinion, is actually not individual. I feel like, and this requires research. This is pure speculation. But from my understanding of, I've read some books on history of evolutionary theory, and from my judgment, I would say it's a group mentality. That because if you go out with friends, and what do you guys usually speak about? I mean, sure, it's great. Like, I have some friends I speak about politics with, but if a lot of times if you're in a big group of friends, sometimes you're just shooting the shit. You're talking about how your day went, and then all of a sudden you talk about, hey, you wouldn't believe the story that happened to me today. And we all do that with our friends at some point or another, or with their family, or our family members tell us stories like that. And I think that's what unconsciously motivates us to have an opinion. If we don't have an opinion on a topic our friends are talking about, we're like, are we going to be left out of the group? And maybe same thing in the office. If people in the office near you are having an opinion about something going on, and then you don't, it's like, are you the colleague that's going to be left out? That's my take on it. I feel like it comes from a group mentality that we're motivated to have opinions. Yes, Sarah.
But I think that differs to the group as that. Not differs. This depends on the group as well, because I've experienced groups in which actually having an opinion is the less desired um, characteristic, where it is important to be indifferent to a lot of things and never have a clear opinion on things because people might get offended or something. And that's like the whole small talk context, what it is about not having an opinion, whereas in other group contexts, like for example, I've noticed myself having an opinion on people not having an opinion, where I think like, if this is important, you should think about this and have an opinion. And but I think this is connected to like the group context as well. Whereas if I had been growing up in a group context where you are more focused on, okay, you might offend someone with an opinion, or you might cause uneasiness to someone with your opinion, then probably I would feel different about this.
But are we not really talking about, in this group dynamic, not changing opinion, but withholding an opinion? Right? I mean, you say in certain group dynamics it's good to not have an opinion. Is this not really saying I don't want to share my opinion because they might not like it or they might not? It's not maybe removing an opinion. Do you see where I'm going with this? I'm not obviously I'm not trying to put words in your mouth whatsoever.
Like maybe it's but I would think it's like even before withdrawing.
And it's interesting that we have an opinion on.
Where I would I think it does make sense to me that it's definitely group related. It's definitely group contextual. I mean, maybe it depends on I think all groups will have some sort of default understanding between themselves, like what on some issues you should have an opinion of. But then I think it differentiates between groups which topics you should have an opinion of or not. So I feel like all groups have some sort of basis off of which you should have, and I don't think we can go meta. I don't think let's maybe make a community judgment that having an opinion on opinions doesn't count, because we can then just go ad infinitum. Yeah, I would agree to and disagree. I think I would agree that there are definitely group differences, but I think those differences are only maybe which topics we have an opinion of, and which we don't.
I guess the next question is, do we have an opinion about what animals do? Because all of these opinions, I think you may have a point in what you're saying about it's a group dynamic. We don't have an opinion when a dog barks at another dog. We don't say, oh, they shouldn't have done this, right? We maybe have an opinion about the owner not being able to do so on and so forth. But I guess we have an opinion about other humans. I'm not sure we have an opinion about, I don't judge a situation that's happening with, I don't want to say non-humans because that sounds kind of alien in some ways, but I don't have an opinion about a dog barking at another dog. I might not like it or might not whatever, but I'm not making a judgment about this. And I wonder if our opinions are so very connected to the human experience that that's where they lie the most in. Just putting it out there, I've got no answer, of course, right? But as I say, I don't return the bike back to the dog or kick the mule back, right? And I wonder if that's maybe the cutoff line of where opinions lie, right? That we find disappointment or joy within other humans.
You remind me of this probably very well-known idea that across different languages would completely change the way in which you perceive something. Like, for example, I'm trying to think of a good example between German and English, because those are the only two languages I know. Like, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, because for some reason I'm thinking of Spanish. Why? I don't speak Spanish, but I know the example comes from Spanish. The example that was given to me comes from that language. And the idea is that if you're if you're in a mall or if you're in a store or art exhibition and you accidentally kick a vase over, right? The vase is kicked over, but saying it will change your perspective. Like if the culture, if the linguistic norm, the way you structure the sentences syntactically, oh, the vase was broken or the vase dropped, that kind of avoids blaming you for what happened, versus in American English, it's very common to put the onus on the, like, yeah, because I'm thinking of your example of the dog owner and the dog. It's the onus on the person who dropped the vase, or who even though they accidentally did it, it wasn't really their fault. It puts the onus on them, and we would say in American English, they broke the vase. Or maybe if we don't say that, maybe it's more common for the person running the art exhibition to be like, who broke the vase? It's so maybe Sarah, maybe because your German is better than mine. I can't think of an example. There are some times though you do use reflexive verbs in German that you don't in English. The first one that comes to mind is when you're saying, I'm remembering something. Like I'll say, I remember this story. Whereas in German, you don't really construct it like that. You say, I'm recalling to myself this happened. Like it's a reflexive verb. Ich erinnere mich. So it's reflexive. You're telling yourself to recall something else, versus in English, it's a direct object. You're remembering something. That's a very small example. I don't think there would be a big difference in how you would perceive what's going on there. But I can't think of like kind of a material example. Yeah, but again, I feel like your statement, Aaron, sounds exactly like that, where it depends on, yeah, I think it depends on a variety of factors. But now I'm thinking, now I have all these ideas for these future Stoic meetups. We can discuss how different languages impact our Stoicism or opinionations. The groups we're in, yeah. So it's about 8:30. Oh yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
One more thing to say, which is a book suggestion, but I tried to figure that out real quick. I don't know if they actually have it in English. It's a book that's called Vom plötzlichen Verlangen zu küssen. It's by Tiffany Watt-Smith. I'm going to try to add this in the chat.
Yeah, definitely right there.
It's a book about emotions like words for emotions that exist in different languages, and that might not exist in your or my language, mother tongue, for example. And I find this very interesting because this is talking about a certain emotion that I wonder if your language doesn't have a word for that emotion. Like, can you actually feel that? You know, like if you have no meaning, no appraisal for a certain situation, can you actually feel it?
There's an example actually that I can think of. My understanding is up until around 1950, there was no natural word in Japan for risk, in Japanese for risk, if I remember correctly. This clearly doesn't mean that there wasn't risk in Japan. It's just described and thought about in a different context. I'm sure if we look back, we're going to find a different variants of it and different ways of coming across it. I understand in English, idle, as in lazy, is not a term that you can use in German, if memory serves me. My German is not very good, I must admit, but idle can be seen as the engine context, but it's not being used in English that way. It's when you call someone idle, this is a term for lazy, and I believe the closest is laziness, rather. But there's obviously a lack of words to cover certain concepts, but certain concepts are still with us. But I do strongly believe that you shape the world with the words that you use, and the language concepts of this too. You know, so I'm terms and conditions apply. I'm a Scot, so when I think about this, I think about Scottish history that has been written. It was recorded in Gaelic, being recorded in English, and that how it does not represent the Hibernians or the colonial, all of these other tribes within this, because it's not, their history is not recorded in the way that they spoke, did, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of nuances that is lost with that. And as I say, I mean, I do think that, I mean, it takes us a long time to learn how to speak and understand language. It's not something we're born with. It is a trained habit. We mold a mind to be able to do this. You know, it doesn't come for free, and we change a mind once we give it language. We can physically see in brain scans that it's never the same again. And I do think that a lot of what we go through. So I'm a security researcher, so hacks are a thing that I talk about, right? But the mind is one great big hack, in my opinion, right? And it takes us 10 years just to make a little adult that can start to just begin to get the basis of I'm different, you're different. Okay, these are different conceptualizations and decentering and so on and so forth. But I do strongly believe that the words that you use color the way that you see the universe, I guess. But that's a feeling. Terms and conditions may apply, I guess, right?
But how is that, for example, I mean, one famous thing that people are saying that is, for example, a German emotion that is like where they took the word into English because it doesn't exist, the word doesn't exist for that, which would be Schadenfreude. How is that for you as English speakers?
I know the word. There are sometimes words like that that just seep into. Actually, another great example. So Schadenfreude is one of them, and we understand it as kind of that joy you feel when somebody does something that fires back at them. So yeah, again, the joy you feel when you see somebody, or the laugh you get when you see somebody get karma. There's another German word that's been built into English, and the reason why I know this is I play chess every week with a local group, and there's a German word that we use in English for chess called Zugzwang, and and what it means is you're in a position in chess in which you cannot improve your position. Any move you make, the best move the position you have is the best you can get. And any move you make, because you have to make a move, you can't skip a turn. Any move you make will ruin your position. It will cause you a disadvantage and lose you the game. So the common term is that if somebody says you're in Zugzwang in chess, the game is lost. The opponent's going to take advantage because they can only make progress. So I guess that's another example where there's no nice nifty word for that. German is one of those languages that I feel like does that well. The Romantic languages, you always have to qualify nouns, but in German you can always just put them together and make new words, and most of the time anyway. Sorry, I wanted to round out the discussion because I said 8:30. I said it is 8 o'clock, and I only budgeted time for an hour and a half for this discussion. By the way, if anybody's interested, there is a linguistic theory that I've heard of that I read a little bit about called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. I'm not sure if anybody knows it, and I'll write it down in here. It's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and it's a theory that the language that you speak natively does affect the way in which you perceive the world in those minor cases where there's differences between how the word is used and the context of the word, or the connotation of the word. Thank you, Sarah. I was going to ask you for this, the link to this book. Oh yeah, okay. I'll write this down. But that's interesting. I would love to have that because there's. I remember reading one time. There's like. In ancient Greece, and I don't know about Greece now, but in ancient Greece, apparently there were several words for love. It's like a separate word for the love of a child, a separate word for love of a parent, and love of a romantic partner. So I feel like, language would definitely, maybe language is part of the reasons why it's hard for us not to have an opinion on some things. The language we speak, the vocabulary we use makes us unconsciously think of those things all the time. So as soon as I have it, okay.
We have it in German.
Is that, did you just take that from the Amazon website? Is that right there, or did I miss it?
I think that, I think I probably found that on Wikipedia or something. So
I guess it's that famous or that well known. Okay, let me write that down. Let me put that somewhere. Before I leave you guys, I have to put this in something.
I really like about this that self-love has its own word.
What has its own word?
Self-love.
Yeah, it's a nice addition for themselves. They nice for the Greeks to not, they have this agape, so this altruistic love, and of course I'm not pronouncing this correctly, but philotia. I think philotia is how we would pronounce it in English. I'm not sure how that's how you would do it in Greek, but it's nice they give two ends of the spectrum. They don't want to discredit one or the other. We're not going to be meeting online next week. I want to start instituting the rule we had before this new lockdown, before the new surge in cases. We're every 2 weeks, we have an in-person meeting, and every 2 weeks we have an online meeting, because I don't want to go full online after we have had so many people come online from different parts of the world. So we're going to have online meetings still, but for the next meeting, I thought I'd change it up to do something in person. So that's the weekend. That's the first full weekend in March we're going to do that on. So if you guys are interested, Aaron, you're in Scotland? Or
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm actually in Germany. I've been here for a couple of years. However, I don't live in Berlin. I live outside of Frankfurt. But with you guys being English speaking and online, I couldn't resist the temptation to come and join. But I am in Berlin quite regularly. Well, I used to be in the before times. So hopefully things will change a little bit and I'll be back more. I certainly will have a reason to visit if you're having online meetings, for sure.
Well, I was going to mention, before you said you don't speak much German, I was going to mention there's a Frankfurt group of Stoics, but I know that's led by Ralph Kurtz. I've met him before, because some of the facilitators in Germany have met each other, and I know their group does it in German. So a lot of the other German groups do it in German. There's one, actually, if you guys are interested, I don't think they do subtitles in English, but maybe the German's slow enough where you can understand some of it. And Sarah, you'll definitely be interested. So it's called, let me look. It's a Stoic podcast, written and produced by three facilitators of Stoic groups. Ralph Kurtz, the facilitator for the Frankfurt Stoics. Tobias, I've met him. He's another facilitator from another German. I forget exactly where. Oh, it's Bonn. And Marcus is the third guy who runs the group. And let me just put the link in here. Stoicapodcast.de. And Marcus, he's an academic. He's a philosophical academic. He specializes in classics. Up his alley, but he's very focused on Stoicism, and they produce a podcast regularly in German. So if you guys are interested, it's good. They do a good job of it. They do a good job.
Cool.
Thanks for the suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll post the next. I'll probably post the next 2 meetups tonight. I'm going to do that now, so the one in person and the one online in 2 weeks. And I hope to see you both the next time around. And thanks for joining us, Aaron, for the first time after the Monday introductory meeting. It's nice to see you here again.
Thank you very much. I had a wonderful time. I had no idea that I could bump into Stoics online and have such an interesting conversation. So I'm very, very grateful to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and it's good to see you come by every week, Sarah. Keep coming. We're lucky to have you. It's also not the best thing to be all male 100% of the time. It's nice to see a female come to a Stoic group, because, just very bluntly spoken, it's hard to. It's very obvious that the Stoic community in the world is male dominated, for probably no other reason than historically males have tended to dominate the philosophical literature. But it's nice to see you come by. So keep coming.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Have a good week, guys.
Thank you. Bye.